What if some of the most interesting compounds being studied in breast cancer research are already hiding in ordinary foods? Scientists have discovered that certain foods contain natural compounds that can influence inflammation, hormone-related pathways, cell signaling, and other biological processes connected to how cancer develops. In laboratory studies, some of these compounds have even shown surprising effects on breast cancer cells. But there's an important catch. What happens to cancer cells in a laboratory is not always what happens when you eat that food. So, which foods actually have meaningful evidence behind them, and which claims are mostly hype? We're counting down 7 foods worth knowing about, and one of them is especially surprising because many women have been told to avoid it over fears about estrogen. The science tells a very different story. Before we begin, there's one important distinction to understand. No single food can cure breast cancer, and nothing on this list should replace medical treatment. Cancer is far too complex for any one ingredient to simply switch it off. But the food we eat can influence the biological environment inside our bodies. Certain nutrients and natural compounds may affect inflammation, oxidative stress, hormone activity, metabolism, and the signals that help cells grow and divide. The evidence also comes in different levels. A compound that affects cancer cells in a laboratory may behave very differently once it enters the human body. That's why we'll look beyond dramatic headlines and focus on what the research actually suggests. And we begin with a group of small, brightly colored fruits hiding an impressive collection of plant compounds. Number 7. Berries. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries may look simple, but their vivid colors come from powerful plant compounds called polyphenols, including anthocyanins. Researchers are interested in these compounds because, in laboratory studies, they can influence processes linked to cancer development, including oxidative stress, inflammation, and the signals that control how cells grow and survive. Some berry compounds have even shown the ability to slow the growth of breast cancer cells under laboratory conditions. But remember the important distinction. Eating a handful of blueberries is not the same as exposing cancer cells directly to concentrated compounds in a laboratory. Human evidence does not show that berries can treat or cure breast cancer. Their real value may be much broader. Berries provide fiber and a variety of protective plant compounds, making them an excellent part of an overall healthy, plant-rich diet. Fresh or frozen, they can easily be added to oatmeal, plain yogurt, or eaten as a snack. But the next food contains a compound that scientists have studied even more closely, and it begins forming only when you chop or chew the vegetable. Number 6. Cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and Brussels sprouts belong to a remarkable family of vegetables, and something interesting happens when you chop, crush, or chew them. Their natural compounds, called glucosinolates, begin breaking down into biologically active substances, including compounds related to sulforaphane and indoles. Researchers have studied these substances because they may influence enzymes involved in processing potentially harmful chemicals, as well as inflammation, hormone metabolism, and pathways that control cell growth. In laboratory studies, sulforaphane has shown intriguing effects on breast cancer cells. But again, these experiments often use concentrations and conditions that cannot be directly compared with simply eating broccoli at dinner. Human research is more complex, and cruciferous vegetables should not be considered a treatment for breast cancer. Instead, they form part of the plant-rich dietary patterns consistently recommended for overall health and cancer prevention. And the next food brings us even closer to one of breast cancer's most important biological questions: estrogen. Number 5. Ground flaxseed. These tiny seeds contain unusually high levels of compounds called lignans. Once flaxseed reaches your gut, Bacteria can transform these lignans into substances that can interact with estrogen-related pathways in the body. That makes flaxseed particularly interesting to breast cancer researchers, because many breast cancers are sensitive to hormones such as estrogen. But here is where the science requires some care. Plant lignans are not simply the same as human estrogen, and flaxseed should never be viewed as a treatment for hormone-sensitive breast cancer. Human studies have produced interesting findings, but researchers are still working to understand exactly how much benefit flaxseed may provide and for whom. Flaxseed also provides fiber and healthy fats, making it easy to include as part of a balanced diet. Ground flaxseed is generally more useful than whole seeds because your body can access its nutrients more easily. You can add a small amount to oatmeal, yogurt, or smoothies. But the next food contains one of the most famous plant compounds ever investigated in cancer laboratories, and its reputation may be far bigger than what human evidence can actually prove. Number 4. Green tea. Inside a cup of green tea is a group of plant compounds called catechins. The most famous is EGCG, a compound that has attracted enormous attention from cancer researchers. In laboratory experiments, EGCG has been shown to influence several processes that cancer cells use to grow, communicate, and survive. Researchers have studied its effects on cell signaling, inflammation, and the formation of new blood vessels that tumors may need as they grow. That sounds impressive, but there is an important catch. The concentrations used in laboratory experiments can be much higher than what reaches your tissues after drinking a normal cup of tea. And human studies have not established green tea as a treatment for breast cancer. So think of green tea as a potentially beneficial part of an overall healthy lifestyle, not as medicine in a cup. And now we reach perhaps the most misunderstood food on this entire list. Some women avoid it because they have heard that it contains estrogen and could increase breast cancer risk. But what does the evidence actually show? Number 3. Soy foods. Tofu, tempeh, edamame, and soy milk contain natural compounds called isoflavones. Because these compounds are classified as phytoestrogens, many people assume they act exactly like human estrogen, and therefore must be dangerous for women concerned about breast cancer. But that comparison is far too simple. Soy isoflavones are structurally different from the estrogen produced by your body, and their effects can vary depending on the tissue and biological environment. They can interact with estrogen receptors, but much more weakly and differently than human estrogen. Large human studies have generally not found that moderate consumption of whole soy foods increases breast cancer risk. In fact, some observational research has linked soy consumption with better outcomes among breast cancer survivors, although that does not prove soy itself is responsible. The important distinction is between traditional whole soy foods and highly concentrated isoflavone supplements. Anyone undergoing breast cancer treatment should discuss supplements with their healthcare team. For most people, foods such as tofu, edamame, and unsweetened soy milk can be part of a healthy diet. But the next food isn't interesting because of one exotic compound. Its potential power may come from something much more fundamental. What happens when it reaches your gut? Number 2. Whole grains and high-fiber foods. Oats, barley, brown rice, whole grain bread, beans, and lentils may not sound like powerful cancer-fighting foods, but their importance may come from something much bigger than a single nutrient. Fiber helps support a healthy gut microbiome, and gut bacteria can influence metabolism, inflammation, and even how certain hormones are processed. A high-fiber diet may also support a healthier body weight, an important factor because excess body fat after menopause is associated with a higher risk of breast cancer. Some research has also linked higher fiber intake with a lower risk of developing breast cancer, although these studies cannot prove that fiber alone is responsible. people who eat more fiber often have other healthy lifestyle habits as well. The practical message is simple. Replacing some refined grains with whole grains and regularly eating beans, lentils, fruits, and vegetables can increase your overall fiber intake. But number 1 reveals the most important lesson of this entire list. Because scientists are increasingly discovering that the strongest protection may not come from one extraordinary food at all. It may come from the way all your foods work together. Number 1. Extra virgin olive oil and the Mediterranean-style diet. Extra virgin olive oil contains monounsaturated fats and plant compounds called polyphenols, which researchers study for their effects on inflammation, oxidative stress, and other biological processes. But the bigger story isn't olive oil alone. The Mediterranean-style diet combines vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, fish, and olive oil, while generally limiting heavily processed foods. Some human research has associated this overall eating pattern with a lower risk of breast cancer, although researchers are still investigating which parts of the diet contribute most. And that brings us to the most important message in this video. There is no single food that breast cancer cells simply hate. Berries, broccoli, flaxseed, green tea, soy, fiber-rich foods, and olive oil are not cancer treatments. Their potential value comes from being part of a long-term pattern that supports overall health. When it comes to reducing breast cancer risk, maintaining a healthy weight, staying physically active, limiting alcohol, avoiding smoking, and following appropriate screening recommendations may matter far more than chasing any single so-called superfood. And if you're undergoing breast cancer treatment, always discuss major dietary changes and especially concentrated supplements with your healthcare team, because some can interact with medications. But there is another side to this story. While some foods may support a healthier biological environment, certain everyday eating patterns are associated with higher cancer risk, and some of them may already be part of your daily routine.